I believe these words came from the Pokemon movie.
It's Halo 3 ODST's type of storytelling mixed with Bloodborne. That's it. That's my pitch for the whole show. What I mean by that, if you're not familiar with the game ODST, is it takes place, there's a character in the sort of present day timeline, and then they're exploring the city called New Mombasa, or they're exploring the streets of New Mombasa. They go around and find different mementos and objects, and each of these objects is related to a different character in the story. And so whenever the character uncovers an object in the present day, it sort of cuts back to a past moment, and then you discover, the sort of story of that individual character that's related to that object, and then each of those mini story arcs connects back to the story that's happening in the present day, and then it's all resolved in that present day in that city. To properly adapt Bloodborne, I think you need to treat Yharnam with the same level of respect and attention to care, and basically also treating it like Yharnam itself as a character. And I feel like the best way to do that is in the game Bloodborne, there's not time travel going on, but there's a lot of weird time distortion, dilation stuff going on, and you have kind of, in my head at least, 3 distinct timelines. Or again, I say timelines, but settings in time, I guess, for lack of a better term. You have the Hunter's Dream, you have the Hunter's Nightmare, and then you have the DLC Hunter's Nightmare with Maria and the fishing hamlet and all that. And so I guess that first nightmare is really what I would consider the present day in Yharnam, right? And everything's been abandoned. All the citizens have, gone crazy. You have all the blood-drunken hunters and things like that. And so if I had a TV show, I would have sort of a present day, let's say, setting, and that's following our main character, the hunter, and they're going through Yharnam after it's already been overtaken by beasts. Then you have the sort of place out of time thing going on with Gehrman and the Hunter's Dream and the doll. And then you have what happened in the past. You learn about what the hunters did in the past. And so you would have the hunter starting out in the Hunter's Dream and then going into the sort of present day nightmare and present day Yharnam. And then they would find all these objects, and so those would bring up past memories and moments with other characters. And so the hunter would piece together the mystery of the healing church, the blood ministration, what exactly the hunt is, what the dream is, and sort of what the hunters did in the fishing hamlet, the ritual of Mensis, things like that. And the plot would sort of unfurl before not only the hunter, but also for the audience. The point of the show is to basically just give more narrative time with each of the characters involved in these different processes. So Maria, Gehrman, Mikolash, characters like that. This allows you to control the pacing of the narrative, so that way, as the hunter is kind of slowly going through Yharnam, you can, especially you want it to be creepy, right? You want it to be very horror-based, and the best way to, properly scare people or to, show shocking things or reveal shocking things is you want to be able to control the pace, and let things you want to keep the audience member in the dark and the main character in the dark, so they don't figure it out all at once. And that leans right into how you play through Bloodborne itself. And same thing for ODST. Again, you're in this present day thing, and all these different objects cutting you back to the past and leading you to other characters. It allows the whole game to sort of slowly just unravel itself. That's the word I'm looking for. And I tried to show these sort of time differences or differences in place too, by having the more, I didn't go fully monochromatic, but you have the mostly green dominated color palettes, and then the oranges and the blues, to kind of show you have the present day Yharnam in the nightmare, right, where the hunter is. That's where we're getting the story of our main character would be taking place in the blues. And then when you go back to the past with the hunters and the fishing hamlet and Maria and all that, it's going to be the sort of pale greens, and then that sort of in-between world, the dream / in the past with Willem and Lawrence and Gehrman, which obviously also involves Gehrman being in the dream and the doll being in the dream. So yeah, I tried to, visually show that difference in the trailer, even though this isn't a real project that I'm actually, I'm not actually making a Bloodborne adaptation. I wanted to try and think about those sorts of things and how could I visually communicate those differences in a way that would kind of tug at your subconscious and connect oh, okay, we're in this era or place now, right? We're dealing with these characters in this part of the story. And there's also lots of other things I tried to hint at that would be, and there are also other parts of the game that I tried to pull from that had a lot of environmental and visual storytelling that I would want to include, in the show as well and expand upon. I guess I don't want to say all of them because it's like, I think part of the fun of watching the trailer is realizing all the little nods to different parts of the lore. But I think a very on the nose, reference that I drew from that if you played the game, you would immediately kind of like point at the screen and be like, oh, I know what he's doing there, is having the winter lanterns in the game. If you're fighting them, you might notice that they have the same body as the doll, who's basically the firekeeper of this game, in the Hunter's Dream. And so it's like immediately this visual storytelling in the game. If you pay, you might miss it. You might play the whole game and not realize like, okay, there's something going on here between the doll and the winter lanterns, and then also at the abandoned Hunter's Dream where you find the abandoned doll. But if you do pay attention, like visually, you're just like, okay, wait, hang on, there's something going on here. There's some sort of connection between these two, between this main character and these enemies. And again, so I wanted to put that in the trailer because I'm making it from the standpoint, coming from the perspective of like, okay, if I was actually making this, what are things I want to tease that are storytelling elements in the game that I would then expand upon in the actual show. Viewers who I think are really deep into the lore and have watched a lot of the cut content videos by people like Lance McDonald, I think is his name. I'll try and link his channel again because I've mentioned him before, but it's been long enough that I'm forgetting his name. But he's like posted videos of different parts of cut content, and I incorporated that as well into areas that I think would fit. And again, I think that if they didn't have time to explore those certain cut content things that they didn't explore in the games, you could explore that cut content. I feel like, again, making an adaptation, that would be the time to take advantage and not just adapt what's already there, but explore that cut content and expand upon it. Now, even though I took all the time to make this as like an animated series, because that's what I've always wanted to do for so many years and imagined, just wanting to use my artistic skills to give proper tribute to Bloodborne. Ironically, I actually think it might be one of the best games to lend itself to a live action adaptation, just because so many live action adaptations for video games are borderline impossible or never done right because you need a huge budget for all the CGI because you got all these impossible things happening, whether it's Greek gods fighting or a green man in space fighting aliens on a ring planet. The good thing about Bloodborne is it's basically just a Victorian London sort of vibe, so you can shoot a ton of things on location. And the great thing about horror is a lot of it's shot in the dark, so even like your creepy CGI monsters, right? CGI it's often cheaper to do, and it's more effective, and it looks better when you shoot creatures that don't actually exist in nighttime settings with lots of smoke, because you can sort of hide a lot of the details and you let the audience's imagination fill in the gaps. And again, that works to Bloodborne's advantage because that works for horror very well to build up the fear in people's minds. But also in terms of a realistic budget for a TV show, this is a lot better than it's like, hey, we need to be able to constantly see Halo elites in broad daylight, so they need to look really convincing and not look in a weird uncanny valley sort of thing. And there's this show called Taboo I watched a few episodes of years back. It's with Tom Hardy. And the second I watched it, I was like, yeah, I can just take the same wardrobe and boom, in like the same locations they're shooting on, and you already have 80% of your Bloodborne TV show. And again, you can, I think, realistically have a much tamer budget for the CGI, and again, that will play into Bloodborne's sort of horror mystery aspect. The second sort of ironic thing, aside from me spending years and years working on what if a Bloodborne was an animated series show and now I'm pitching a live action show. I'm not really a big fan of video game adaptations or TV show adaptations in general. They serve a way to expose to like a broader audience certain video game IP and stuff like that, especially for people who, probably would otherwise just never play the video games and never really be exposed to them. So while I get that, I just think a lot of the adaptations so far have been kind of weird to me, because it's like from the Uncharted live action movie basically just being a full circle of Indiana Jones inspired a video game, inspired a movie, to much more recently like the Last of Us TV show series, which I'm not sure, because in my mind, when I played through The Last of Us, or played some of it, I never finished it. Felt like the makers of this video game just wanted to make a TV show. All the game mechanics are very shallow. It's just a very bog standard third-person cover shooter, and I just don't get to play the game half the time. It feels like there's like 15 hours of cutscenes I just have to sit there and watch, and I just don't do anything as a player. I'm like, why is this even a video game? This should just be a TV show. So when they announce it to be a TV show, I'm like, yeah, that totally makes perfect sense. Like, that is a game that, again, it felt like it already should have been a show. But then also I'm like, wait, is that a good or bad adaptation? Because at that point, if a game is already like 15 hours of cutscenes, and then you're making a show that, a season's going to be like, what, like 8 hours, like 1 hour episodes, and like probably 8 or 9 of them. So it's like, you're just going to have less of the thing you already played through / watched. But on the other hand, I get it makes for an easy adaptation, because again, I was playing that game, I'm like, this should just be a TV show. Like, I'm bored playing, in quotes, this video game, and then they made it into a show. I'm like, yeah, that makes so much sense. So it's like, I guess it's certainly an easy adaptation to make, but again, I don't even know if it really makes sense, because it's like same thing if you adapted God of War or something. Like, there's so many high quality cutscenes in that game that at some point it's like, if 50% of this game is just watching cutscenes, what's the point of turning it into a TV show when it already feels like one? That's an entirely different discussion. I digress. But my point is, with a game like Bloodborne, I actually think that it can benefit from an adaptation. If you take games that are gameplay oriented and gameplay focused, but have a really nice, juicy lore in the background with really interesting characters that you only get glimpses of, right? You only just get a tease of a lot of like what's going on with Maria and Gehrman and, the church hunters and all that stuff, Castle Canehurst, all that. There's all these teases as to what's going on, and you can kind of piece together some of it yourself, and other parts is you just kind of have to like use your imagination and make up and fill in the blanks, which is really fun. Again, for me, I think that's a perfect way to tell a video game story, but I think that's why it does leave a window open for a great adaptation, because basically you can look at what's given in the game, and then you can also put together in your mind a timeline that you think, like, it's basically just an adaptation is already just one interpretation of a video game story. So it's like the great thing about Souls-likes and the way FromSoftware really formats all of their games, or, games like Hollow Knight and stuff like that, is it already opens up the player to allow their own interpretation to sort of thrive within the story. And so you basically just get to take whatever that interpretation is and turn it into a TV show. And so there's not even necessarily a right or wrong way. So I think it gives you a lot more leniency in what you can choose to adapt and what you can choose not to adapt. And I also think the adaptation itself no longer feels like a waste of time in my mind, because it's like you get to make it really character focused. Again, you get to explore, and again, in my mind, Yharnam, the city itself, is a character, and then all the characters within. And since we only got to see glimpses of them and a few cutscenes here or there, and it's mostly just item descriptions for like what's actually going on with each of the characters, getting to really explore them in a TV show would be satisfying to me as someone who's a fan of the game, because it's like, okay, I actually get to see more, what's up with all these characters, as opposed to like The Last of Us, where it's like, again, I already watched these characters for 20 hours, so watching them do just the same scenes again with basically just higher fidelity in a live action show, it's just like redundant almost. So I ironically, even though I'm not the biggest fan of adaptations, I actually think that games like Dark Souls or Bloodborne lend themselves the best to being adapted, because again, you have that like open for interpretationness to take certain liberties, but then also you get to finally explore and see more of the characters you were left wanting more of because you like the story in that game so much. A fun quick anecdote is, for the first 2 years, whenever I was kind of, again, slowly chipping away at this project, I always thought it would be fun to like release it around Halloween. And then just as I've gotten closer naturally to finishing it this year, I kind of realized like, oh wait, I actually might finish this almost on Halloween. So yeah, I just thought that was fun. Moving on to the art process behind the scenes part of the video, I just wanted to show like what exactly my setup was in After Effects and how I used it to animate everything. So this is a scene right here, for example. If I go ahead, it's like the Yharnam city reveal, right? And essentially what I did is, you'll see in this window over here, is you can turn on 3D layers. So you can make these layers and expand them out into a 3D space. You can space them out however you want to. If I change the view to a top down, you can see exactly how I have all the layers spaced out. And I just made these paintings in Procreate on the iPad. And the whole time I was working in Procreate, I basically had to try and guess how I was going to break down and group everything into layers once I exported it into After Effects, because it's like, okay, I know like I want these different levels of the city, right, to be at different distances from one another, and then I want the clouds to be here, and then I want the hunter to be here in the foreground with the platform. And so I had to paint it in a way that I didn't just blend everything together. I had to kind of paint in sections, knowing that these would eventually be brought into After Effects and turn into 3D layers. And if we go back to the custom view, so what this allows me to do is I would basically create a null object and then parent my camera to said null object. And then I now have like handles over here where I can move a quote unquote camera in and out to affect my scene and how I want to render it. And having all the layers spread out is it creates a parallax effect. And all that basically means is as I move, a camera closer or farther away, or if I had these, the scenes in the background, if I had the different layers moving left to right, they're going to move at different speeds because they're different distances away from the actual camera. And so this just gives everything a bit more of a 3D feel. So if I was zooming in and everything was flat, right, it was all just on one image, I know that it may not seem like it would make a huge difference, but trust me, it would look so flat and dull compared to the sort of dollying I'm doing with the camera. And I also did try for a few of the reveals, I tried to do like a dolly zoom thing. I never actually went back and looked up exactly what this is, but in my head I was calling it a dolly zoom. I feel like I saw a video on YouTube like 10 years ago talking about that in movies. It's the shot like in Jaws where it's like a character is in the lens and then the camera gets pulled back, but then it zooms in at the same time, I think. And it creates this like, sort of, it's like a classic shot Spielberg is known for. And so again, I never actually went back to like verify any of this. I just kind of remembered always wanting to do that with some of these shots. I don't even know if I did it here. I don't think I did, but in like the Lady Maria clock tower scene I did. But so basically, yeah, it's like I would keyframe the camera to start zoomed in, and then I'd have the null object that's the actual camera itself pretty far zoomed in, and then I'd slowly pull it back. And then at the same time, I would have my camera option right here. Yeah, I have my camera right here, and you can see that I don't have any keyframes on the zoom, so I didn't do it on this one. But then I would zoom it in at the same time as I'm pulling back, and it would just, I don't know if I did it effectively. You can let me know, but I think it worked pretty well in that Lady Maria clock tower scene. Again, I feel like it just pulls everything a little bit and stretches it and makes it look a little funky in a good way. So speaking of keyframing, in this shot here where I've got like the interior of one of the universities of Bergenworth, if I kind of scrub through here, you'll see I have like a light flickering going on, right? And so to create this, I'm sure there's a variety of ways to create this sort of effect. But what I did is when I was painting it in Procreate, I had a layer that was just a multiply layer. There was like a soft overlay over everything. And you can see here I'm toggling it on and off. And so what I did is I just manually keyframed it, right? Flickering it in and out where I raised and lowered the opacity of the layer so it would change the darkness of everything around it. So it looks like whenever my candle is flickering, it's an actual 3D object being affected by light. But yeah, I just keyframed a multiply layer, and then I did the same thing for this highlight layer here. If I toggle it on and off, see, I just have like a few spots highlighted, so it kind of highlights, it highlights the candle edges and then sort of the edges of the desk that it's on. And then, yeah, just a few things like that. Obviously, I then added actual particle flame effects around the candle. And then same thing in Procreate. Basically, what I did for all of these paintings is I just had to guess how I was going to animate them and how I could do that effectively for whatever effect I wanted before I ever ported everything into After Effects, because I knew once I did, like, that was it. I was just going to be moving on with the project at that point when I finished all these paintings. So yeah, for this one, I just made a highlight layer and I made a multiply layer with a soft overlay. And then, all right, so I made a few different candle length layers. And then I just, like, it's like a couple of these in here, but then I keyframed them as well to just fading in and out. So it looks like, right, the flame is flickering up and down, right, getting brighter. And then sort of just the effect of all of that put together. Again, it's probably a pretty crude way of doing it, right? It's like I just painted a bunch of different layers, and then I just had to manually keyframe all of them to get the effect of a candle flicker and affecting the whole room. Maybe there's a way easier, smarter way to do this, but I think it got the job done. And then I did have to make everything 3D in this one, but again, this time I wasn't like needing to I didn't need a parallax effect or anything like that, but I just, as the shot went up, I wanted to show more and more of the room. And so that's why I made it a 3D layer so that I could do this. And then going back to this document, you can see I have 3 of the shots of my different scenes right in this one document. And that's just because my computer could only handle so many of the paintings, so many of the layers at once. Oh, and by the way, what I did is from Procreate, I just exported each of these as a PSD, and it just, I don't know why. I did that in the past the last time I used After Effects, so I just kind of stuck to what I knew. Maybe there's a better way to do this, I'm not sure, but I found I was able to keep the same quality if I export it as a PSD file and then open that in After Effects. Since they're both Adobe programs, I just found that they played nice together. But yeah, since my computer can only handle so much in terms of rendering and then in terms of like actually adjusting the layers, animating them, adding visual effects and stuff like that, I had to basically break them up into a couple or a few paintings at a time. And this definitely provided a challenge because if you've noticed, if you've watched my trailer, everything is timed to the voice lines and to different sounds and to music and stuff like that. And so I tried to just string together the scenes that I knew would flow from one into the other. And then I had to basically just hope that in the end, they would all string together smoothly and it would all turn out good. And you'll also notice here, I tried to not use any, even like the free 4K, pre-rendered particle videos I could just like slap in and do a screen overlay. I wanted this to be a culmination of everything I've learned in terms of being a painter and then also animating and using a program like After Effects. So all the dust effects, particle effects, flame effects you see, I created using the particle effects in After Effects. And I just said the word effects a lot. And then the final After Effects tool that I sort of use to animate things is I use the puppet pin tool. So if I do go into this layer and I kind of scroll through slowly, hopefully my OBS picks it up, you'll see that these guys are kind of all like rocking back and forth a little bit. And then also the opacity of this fire is changing. And I keyframe the opacity, but then for each of the individual guys back here, they each have their own, keyframes from the puppet pin tool. And that's a tool here where you can set different points and then move them around. And that allows you to animate them, pretty smoothly, pretty quickly. And I just didn't want everything to look static because when I first rendered some of these shots, things felt a little bit lifeless in comparison to other shots. So I did that for them. I puppet pin tooled the cloak you can see here. So yeah, as you can see here, I set a bunch of puppet pin tools and I just move them around. And then so that way it looks like, it's a cloak. They're made of feathers. So they should be kind of like moving, flapping in the wind as you see all this kind of dust going by to indicate that there's wind. And then as for the Blade of Mercy here, I'm pretty sure I just moved the anchor point and then just keyframed rotating it. I didn't need to use the puppet pin tool for that. And then here's just like another shot of what that looks like using the different particle generators. Because I mostly did like foreground dust, background dust, and then some of the bokeh lights. So it looked like a real camera lens existed. I tried to put a camera, like a smudge on the camera for like the Maria scene, for example, just to, again, even though I'm using a virtual camera and steering it around, I wanted to use actual directing moves and tricks with the camera to make it feel just a little bit more real, like someone is filming it. In my personal opinion, I feel like it adds a little bit more style to everything. And this is one of the examples that I did have an MP4 that just like adds a little bit, okay, maybe not on this keyframe. There we go, added a little bit more light change to make everything a little bit more dramatic. It just added a little bit more drama to the scene, which I liked. But for the most part, again, in terms of like actual particles, I did it all in After Effects. The top 3 editing frustrations I had while working on everything, because I had to work in smaller bite-sized chunks for the After Effects scenes, I had to import like, 14 or something different scenes into DaVinci Resolve. And for some reason, when I did that, like half the audio, even though it was perfectly fine coming out of After Effects as an MP4, like half the audio just had like weird popping, clicking sounds. And I was trying to, convince myself it would be okay, but I just had to re-add. Luckily, I've organized most of the audio that I was using for the scenes, but I had to basically re-put in all the audio and splice it together into the actual timeline on DaVinci Resolve. And even though that MP3 was the same MP3 that was attached to the MP4 from After Effects, suddenly that fixed it. I don't get it at all. But those types of things happen. Obviously, it's the classic where, you do everything you can to make sure everything is perfect before you render each of your scenes in After Effects because it takes a while to render. But you're still going to, notice things that go wrong and have to redo shots. And honestly, like the first, I anticipated having problems right away, but honestly, the first 4 or 5 were fine. But then every single one of them after that, I noticed stuff. Actually, I think the dust particles themselves are a bit more intense than I was maybe envisioning, but that's because like the whole time I was looking on that small window in After Effects and I couldn't really tell. And then by the time I went through and I rendered each of the shots and I tried to adjust them a bit, but then it's like adjusting one. I needed to adjust all of them so that they were a bit more cohesive for each of their shots. And then at some point it was like, okay, this is just kind of going to be the style now. And then for whatever reason, just doing my final export in DaVinci Resolve took, again, I assumed it would take a long time. I assumed there would be problems, but for some reason, all the colors kept being washed out. The gamma was all off. The values of everything was kind of crushed a bit, so the paintings themselves weren't as dramatic. And, it can be frustrating because it's like, okay, I spent, upwards of 20 hours on like half of these paintings, and the colors were all fine-tuned to exactly how I wanted. The values were all touched up and, adjusted to exactly how I wanted, just for them to be washed out and sort of crushed in all of these different renderings as I was taking it through everything. And I did my best to fix it. I mean, I went down a path of like, don't export it as H.264, do H.265, or actually export it as like a ProRes or DNxHR, some weird DaVinci one. And then, it's like you use a different codec, and then you're going to take it into Handbrake, and then use Handbrake to recompress it into an MP4. And I did all of that, and it never really totally fixed the colors. Maybe I'll put an edit of like on screen of kind of closer to what it looked like on my iPad when I was painting it the whole time, and then how it ends up looking in the videos. And then same thing when I upload, I'm going to upload all of them to ArtStation. I had to compress all the files because I worked at like a 4K size, and I can't upload 26 paintings in 4K. So I just had to like kind of compress all of them, and that, cause, it's like unfortunate because you spend a lot of time to make something exactly how you want it to be. And then the final result, you're spending days and days trying to adjust it to get it back to how you want. But then, I think there's partially to say, which this whole project for me has been a good exercise for me in understanding like perfectionism versus just getting something out. Like this is just a thing for me to do, for hopefully other fans to see and to enjoy. So it's like I want it to be out there in the world so that people who are fans of Bloodborne can go like, oh, that's a really cool, tribute to that game. But at the same time, it's like I want things to be perfect. I've spent, at the end of the video, I say 7 years, and not 7 years on this, these specific series of paintings, which I think I have talked about in some of my other behind the scenes videos, where it's like this current one has really only been like 2.5 years in total of starting these paintings and animating these ones, but 7 years in all. But 7 years in total of, again, I've had a couple of different drafts of this Bloodborne as an animated series project in different art styles and kind of coming along the way. And again, like I said, it's that like I wanted to make it perfect. And luckily, as time went on, I became a better and better artist, and I continue to improve. So it's like I am much happier with how it came out now than if I had pushed it out 6 years ago. But at the same time, again, I do just need to get it out. So it's like, okay, even if all the colors and everything isn't perfect, I also understand and have to understand that 99.9% of people aren't going to notice. Like, they're just going to watch the video one time, and, I think the biggest video on my YouTube channel right now has like 12,000 views or 13,000 views. It's my Castle Crashers one. So if that many people, which would be crazy, see this, most of my videos have like a couple hundred views. They're probably going to watch it one time is my point, and then never again. So, as long as the overall experience is still there, I kind of have to just swallow my pride and move on. Which also leads me into a quick anecdote. I guess it was like 7 years ago when there was a World of Warcraft cinematic. It's like the Jaina Proudmoore, Daughter of the Sea one I think it might have been for Shadowlands for that expansion. And I haven't played WoW in forever since Cataclysm, but I've probably talked about this in another one, but maybe I'm repeating myself from a year ago in one of the other videos. But yeah, it's like the second I saw that cinematic, I had this Bloodborne as an animated series like trailer, like fan trailer, made up of a bunch of paintings and things in my head, because the colors they used, and there was like some, it was just like a few shots, right? It was like these sails and masts in the water, and there's a sort of, matte green color palette going on, or washed out green color palette going on. And there's like some barnacles on a few like pieces of wood, in the water. And I was like, I can already picture every single thing and how I want this project to look. And, it's kind of crazy to think about, because at the time my artistic skills I had just started to learn how to become an artist and to do art. And it was a very basic level. And my digital art knowledge was also very basic. And I would probably have achieved lower level quality of paintings than the one in that WoW cinematic video. But now it's really cool to think about. But it's like, okay, like even though I'm a pretty harsh critic on my own work, but it's like I can't objectively look at like the level of rendering of those. And I'm not saying it's indicative of the artist's skill, by the way. I'm sure they were told to do a specific style. I'm not saying it's bad. Again, I love it. I love those WoW cinematics. But it is pretty cool to look at like the level of rendering and painterly quality of those cinematics and the images they used, and then look at the ones that I made, and I'm like, wow, I actually think I might have surpassed those original ones that inspired me, 7 years ago. That's a really, really cool feeling to just kind of look back at and think about. I definitely think that more often than not, especially if this was done in a professional setting, you should definitely have a storyboard, right? Like a very just quick, even pencil sketch of all of the frames done for each scene, so that you can lay out how you want the trailer to go with the music and having all the different scenes pop up on beat for each voice line and stuff like that. Like you should definitely do, if this was in a professional setting, you should definitely make like a simplified version of everything to figure out the timing and all that with the paintings before you actually make the paintings and go into all that. Because if you end up not needing shots or shots aren't going to work, you haven't wasted all that time. But I will say, like, I have, again, since it has been like 7 years of thinking about this and thinking over the shots and what voice lines I want to use and what shots I want to use, I always thought I was going to make one, but I literally never ended up needing to make one because, for example, the shot where it's the weird animated corpse talking about, Ludwig coming, and then like having like the beat drop and then having Ludwig's theme play and then have, the Ludwig and then the cleric beast and then, Ebriitis, or however you say it, and then, the brain of Mensis and then the moon presence. Like that shot with that timing on each of those beats has been in my head. I'm not kidding you. Like for years, I will be in random places, wherever in the world, doing whatever with my life, and I have so badly wanted to make this for so long. And as I've again slowly chipped away at it, like I will just randomly, in the most random times, I'll be shopping in Target, swimming at a beach, whatever. I will suddenly think about that scene, and again the exact beat, the exact rhythm when each character shows up, how they're moving. And yeah, it's just like one of those things where it was always replaying in my mind. So it's like finishing this project is literally a near decade long just like moment of euphoria of finally getting it all out there and being done. Because yeah, I never needed to make a storyboard because I've had it running around in my head for 8 years, and I've slowly sort of molded it and shaped it and edited it in my mind over the course of those years. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do once I brought in those final paintings. But yeah, if this was a professional setting, I definitely would not recommend doing that or going about it in that way. And finally, because, like I said, I want to show every single aspect of the process of everything. That includes the deliverables at the end, which is like everything I need to deliver along with this final render of this. And that includes like, just going back and doing small things like placing my signature on all of my paintings. I had to change and make sure all the color profiles matched, because I guess like half of them were sRGB, half of them were Adobe 98, and that's unfortunate because those are very different color profiles. So switching from one to the other either drastically oversaturates one of my paintings, how I painted it the whole time, or it washed out the colors of the other. So that was another, frustration to run into, where I'm like, at what point did I guess I was just like duplicating canvases, and I happened to about evenly do like 12 on like sRGB and like 14 on Adobe, and that was very unfortunate. We had to go back and do stuff like that. And then again, even after finishing this final video, it's like I had to just place my watermark and signatures on everything for ArtStation. Like I said, I had to downsize everything. I ran everything through the Glaze software, and I had to do that a couple times because I downsized everything first and then did it, and then there's like all this artifacting going on the final paintings, so I had to actually use my 4K paintings first, run them through Glaze, and then downsize them. Obviously rendering the final video and then anticipating, hey, I know the first render is probably not going to be the right one. I'm either going to notice mistakes, or again, I'm going to have a weird problem like the colors being washed out. Like, I went in expecting that to happen. So luckily when it happened, I wasn't frustrated, or I wasn't like behind on the schedule. I had set, it's just like, okay, I anticipated this happening. So I have given myself the time to develop and kind of go back and tweak and fix these problems. I have the final trailer that I want to deliver in put it on YouTube, but then it's like I also needed to record this video to go along with it. I need to edit it, and then upload it before my actual trailer goes live so that I can link to this one. So if people want to see the story breakdown, they can come here for that. And then again, I also need to upload all of the paintings to ArtStation now that they've all been properly formatted, watermarked and all that. And then I also need to upload high quality versions of the one I want to sell as prints, so that people, if they want to, get these paintings as prints. Fan art kind of confuses me. I definitely have been wanting to make this for a long time, and I know that a lot of people like what they already like. And so I see tons of people selling fan art, so I'm just like, okay, I guess I can do this. And then if Sony comes for me and says, hey, don't do that, then I'll just have to stop. But again, there are very high profile artists who I follow, who will make fan art of something like Halo and then just like sell a painting. I'm like, oh, I guess you can just do that. But yeah, so there's all these extra things that I need to do on top of just making this the one trailer video, so that everything calls onto itself and calls back to itself. And finally, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, especially if you've watched the others, and I'm sure the sound quality and stuff is very different in all of them, as they were all recorded like a year ago. I really appreciate it. And on the final note, it's like I'm not really quite sure what the future, obviously, as trying to be a human artist even is. I haven't worked in any professional capacity, so it's like I'm just doing this, I say for fun, but I did make a Patreon in hopes that people will support me, because then at least this is hundreds and thousands of hours of my time accumulated, and it's like I want to be able to pursue this in some capacity, even if it's like I have to accept, hey, I've got to work, or I'm working doing other things and then doing this on the side. I did decide to go ahead and do a Patreon, just because, again, if 100 people, I think, watched, like 120 people watched my last behind the scenes video for this, or at least clicked on it, even if like 3 or 5 of them, like, hey, I'll toss you $2 or $4 on Patreon. Suddenly it's like it makes it a little bit easier to justify me continuing to pursue this, especially in the wake of just like how uncertain everything is going forward. Like I really do love art. I love Bloodborne. I want to be able to make more stuff like this. Obviously I want to make my own stuff, but it's like, again, I get that people like established things, so it's like there's a Halo video I'd like to make, a marathon. I did a few paintings based off Marathon a few months ago. I still need to make the video for that. I'd love to do some sort of Elden Ring based series. It could also be a justification for me to get to go back and play the DLC, because I still haven't got to play the DLC since it came out. And so yeah, it's like if you made it all the way to the end and you actually listen to me talk the whole time and like the trailer, truly I really appreciate that. That's really awesome. And then again, if don't feel like you have to, but it would really allow me to, like I said, just justify a little more spending this time, is making a little bit of money on Patreon, and that way I can kind of keep going. Obviously, if this was the Renaissance time and the church or the crown was just like, we want you to be a great artist, so we're just going to pay you $1 billion, and your only job is to get really good at art and make amazing paintings, go do that. If you do have Catholic Church money or the King of Spain money, and you want to fund me making art for my whole life, deal, done. Email me, Spain, and I'll do it. But in the meantime, assuming no King of Spain is coming to sponsor me and be my entire Patreon, just watching the video to the end is really cool, because like I said, even if it's like 20 people make it to the end, then to me that's worth it. And at least because it's like you want people to see, going back to all my paintings kind of being compressed and having different problems with the color washing and all that stuff. It's like it's frustrating because you spend all the time just for people to not see the version that you made, that's in front of you. But at the same time, if no one sees it at all, that's also it's like, oh man, like I made this so people can see it. You know what I mean? I think that's the point of why artists make a Patreon, so that they can pursue this stuff. Cause it's like, hey, I want to be able to be supported so that I can continue to make this for other people. Because clearly companies don't want to pay people. They're the ones with the money. And if they don't want to pay human artists to make stuff, then it's kind of just like Patreon or bust at this point. But again, that's a whole other topic and video. And it's also interesting just because I started this project and no AI technology existed at all. Like that was not a thing. Like that is not a thing I anticipated I would even be saying in one of these videos. Like when I was finishing it, obviously around the time I started this version, stuff was coming out. I think the Dolly Mini 2 or whatever had just released. But it's just weird because like that technology didn't even exist when I started this, and now it's like throwing everything for a loop. So any sort of support is appreciated so that I can continue to do this in some capacity. But yeah, Thank you so much for watching to the end. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
It's never easy when there's so much on the line. But you and I can make a difference.
And a bonus, not really complaint, but I guess just like, thought, because I think of all of the extra sound effects I added to the trailer as a sort of enhancement. So it's not a problem that they aren't maybe that noticeable. But yeah, just an extra thought is like I spend a good amount of time looking for those sound effects, adding them in, and then I kind of have to turn them down lower because obviously the music and then the dialogue are the most important things. You want to use these sounds to enhance the experience, but you don't really want them to take center stage, right? It's like you don't want them to overpower the dialogue or the music or muddy the two. But I still think the amount of time spent looking for the sound effects and then plugging them in and trying out different ones and then adjusting the volume versus maybe how noticeable they are, it can feel not like a waste of time, but maybe like sort of like 80-20 rule, like it's not entirely worth that time effort. I'm still glad I did it because I enjoy doing that. Maybe in another life I was a Foley artist or something. Again, it's not really complete as much as the others, but it's more just like, you put in a lot of effort into small areas and you just kind of hope like, okay, they're not supposed to be noticeable, but you kind of secretly hope people notice them at the same time, if that makes sense. I feel like I might have actually forgotten the original point I was going to make. But anyway, moving on.